He controlled the Roman Empire. She wielded the dagger that ended his reign. Hello history buffs, welcome back to the channel, where we delve into the dark corners of the past to uncover tales of power, betrayal, and sometimes outright murder. Today, we're not just talking about any murder. We're talking about the assassination of one of the most powerful men in Roman history, a man who held the entire empire in his iron grip. And we're not just talking about who did it, but why and how a woman dared to defy his absolute authority and strike the killing blow. This is the story of Marcia Aurelia Sionia Demetrius, or as history remembers her, Marcia, the woman who murdered Emperor Commodus. Prepare to journey back to ancient Rome, a world of gladiatorial combat, political intrigue, and simmering resentment, a world where even the most powerful emperor could fall victim to a single act of carefully planned vengeance. Get ready to have your assumptions challenged, because the truth about Marcia and Commodus is far more complex and captivating than you might imagine. Let's dive in. To truly understand Marcia's actions, we need to first understand the man who cast the longest shadow over her life, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor. Commodus, the man Marcia would later murder, was his son. Marcus Aurelius was revered, admired, not just for his imperial power, but for his wisdom, his stoicism, and his unwavering dedication to the Roman people. He ruled with a sense of justice and fairness that earned him the respect of senators and citizens alike. Imagine a figure so noble, so righteous, that his very name became synonymous with good governance. That was Marcus Aurelius. But even the greatest of men have flaws, and Marcus Aurelius's greatest misjudgment was arguably his choice of heir, his son Commodus. Unlike his father, Commodus showed little interest in philosophy, governance, or the well-being of the empire. He preferred the spectacle of gladiatorial combat, the decadence of lavish feasts, and the sycophantic praise of his inner circle. His very first act was to betray his father's plans of continued war in Germania by ending the conflict and returning to Rome, trading long-term stability for short-term gratification. Marcus Aurelius had carefully chosen his generals and advisors, men of experience and proven loyalty, but Commodus, suspicious and easily swayed, gradually replaced them with flatterers and opportunists. The seeds of discontent were sown early in Commodus's reign. The Senate, accustomed to the principled leadership of Marcus Aurelius, found themselves increasingly sidelined and ignored. The Roman people, who had benefited from the stability and prosperity of the previous reign, began to murmur their dissatisfaction. This growing resentment created a fertile ground for conspiracy, and within this atmosphere of unease, Marcia found herself increasingly drawn into the inner circles of power. Marcia's origins are somewhat shrouded in mystery. She wasn't born into a noble family. She wasn't a political figure in her own right, at least not initially. She was, initially, a concubine in Commodus's household, meaning she was essentially a long-term mistress, and in Roman society, concubines held a very specific, and often precarious, position. They were not wives. They didn't have the same legal rights, but they could wield significant influence, especially if they captured the emperor's affections. Marcia, however, was no ordinary concubine. She possessed a sharp intellect, a keen understanding of human nature, and a remarkable ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the imperial court. She was also, crucially, a Christian, though this was something she kept largely hidden. As Christianity was still a relatively new and often persecuted religion within the empire, she quickly became more than just a source of pleasure for Commodus. She became his confidant, his advisor, and, in some ways, his protector. She used her influence to temper his worst impulses, to steer him away from disastrous decisions, and to occasionally intervene on behalf of those who had incurred his wrath. Imagine her as a stabilizing force within a chaotic storm, a voice of reason whispering in the ear of a volatile and unpredictable emperor. She would plead on the behalf of Christians, and she was able to get them released. And she seemed to be concerned with the well-being of Rome, not just Commodus's short-sighted desires. Her position afforded her immense wealth and power, but it also placed her in a uniquely dangerous situation. She was privy to the emperor's secrets, she was aware of his flaws, and she knew the extent of his cruelty. She also saw the growing discontent within the empire, and understood that Commodus's reign was rapidly spiraling towards disaster. She saw the empire crumbling, and knew if the Roman Empire fell, so would everyone in it. Commodus's reign became increasingly erratic, marked by paranoia, megalomania, and a growing detachment from reality. he began to identify himself with Hercules, the mythical hero known for his strength and prowess. He donned lion skins, carried a club, and demanded that he be worshipped as a god. He participated in gladiatorial contests himself, much to the horror and disgust of the Roman elite. He would slaughter animals in the arena, often with theatrical displays of brutality, and he would even fight against disabled gladiators, ensuring his victory was always assured. The Senate was powerless to stop him, their authority eroded by years of neglect and intimidation. The city of Rome itself began to reflect the emperor's madness. Statues of Commodus were erected throughout the city, depicting him as Hercules. The names of the months were changed to reflect his titles and accomplishments. The very fabric of Roman society was being warped to accommodate the whims of a delusional tyrant. His insanity would seem almost cartoonish if it weren't for the deadly effect it had on those around him. Senators he distrusted were executed, political rivals were exiled, and anyone who dared to criticize him, even in private, risked incurring his wrath. The atmosphere in Rome was thick with fear, and the prospect of a sudden violent end loomed large for anyone who dared to stand against the emperor. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Roman history, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. We have many more stories to tell, secrets to uncover, and fascinating figures to explore. And don't forget to let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like me to cover in future videos. Now, let's get back to the story. As Commodus's madness intensified, the whispers of conspiracy grew louder. Marcia, along with other key figures in the imperial court, realized that something had to be done. The empire was on the brink of collapse, and Commodus, in his delusion, was leading them all towards ruin. The Praetorian Guard was essentially the emperor's personal bodyguard, and the prefects held immense power within the city. Their involvement was crucial to the success of any plot against Commodus. The conspirators considered several options, including outright assassination in the arena or during a public appearance, but they ultimately settled on a more subtle and carefully planned approach: poisoning. They understood that a public assassination would likely plunge the empire into chaos, potentially sparking a civil war. A more discreet method would allow them to control the succession and ensure a more stable transition of power. Marcia, with her access to the emperor's personal chambers and her intimate knowledge of his habits, was ideally positioned to administer the poison. It was a role that placed her in immense danger, but she understood the stakes and was willing to risk everything to save the empire. She had seen his lists of people to be executed, and her name was on it. She was saving herself as well as Rome. The plot was set in motion. On December 31st, 192 AD, the conspirators put their plan into action. Marcia prepared Commodus's evening meal, carefully lacing it with poison. According to historical accounts, the poison was intended to be slow-acting, causing Commodus to gradually weaken and die over a period of several days. This would allow the conspirators to maintain control and manage the succession. However, the poison didn't work as planned. Commodus vomited up the poisoned food, thwarting the initial attempt. Realizing that their plan was on the verge of failure, the conspirators panicked. They knew that if Commodus discovered their plot, they would all face a gruesome and agonizing death. In a desperate act, they turned to Narcissus, a wrestler and Commodus's personal training partner. They convinced Narcissus that Commodus was planning to have him killed, and they persuaded him to finish the job. Narcissus, fueled by fear and self-preservation, entered Commodus's chambers and strangled him to death. The death of Commodus was initially presented as a natural one, but the truth soon emerged. The Senate, relieved by the removal of the tyrant, declared Commodus a public enemy and ordered the destruction of his statues. The reign of terror was over, and the Roman Empire breathed a collective sigh of relief. Marcia, for her part, emerged as a hero, the woman who had dared to defy the emperor and save the empire from ruin. She had risked everything, and she had succeeded. So, what have we learned from the story of Marcia, the woman who murdered Rome's most powerful man? We've learned that even in the most oppressive regimes, acts of defiance are possible. We've learned that power can corrupt, but courage and conviction can triumph. And we've learned that history is rarely black and white. It's a complex tapestry of human motivations, political machinations, and unexpected twists of fate. Marcia wasn't just a murderer. She was a survivor, a strategist, and, in some ways, a savior. She navigated a treacherous political landscape. She used her influence to protect the vulnerable. and she ultimately took the drastic step of assassinating an emperor to save the empire from itself. Her story is a testament to the power of individual agency, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. You don't have to be an emperor, a senator, or even a powerful general to make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is a single act of courage, a single moment of defiance, to change the course of history. Think about your own life. What injustices do you see? What small acts of courage can you do to make a positive impact? I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the life and actions of Marcia. Her story is a reminder that history is filled with unexpected heroes and complex motivations. If you found this video informative and engaging, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating historical tales. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on Marcia and Commodus. Do you think Marcia was justified in her actions? Was she a hero or simply an opportunist? Let me know your opinions in the comments below.